Hello there, welcome to the second video. If you didn't watch the first one, I assume that you already have Python running your machine. And if you haven't, please go back and watch the first video where I taught how to install Python. And so in this particular one, you could check easily if you don't have Python on your machine by just doing python -- version. And this will check and tell you that you have Python. So now in this case, I have Python. And I did not show how to set up an environment, but I also have another video in my list here. Just look through, there's another video of how to set up a conda environment. Just watch that video, and once you're done with that video, then you could come back to this video, because some of the stuff I'll be using here, like the Jupyter notebook, I've already set it up in that particular video. But if you're already good to go with that, then the next step is to get our Jupyter running, because the code that I'll be doing today, I'll be using Jupyter. You don't have to use Jupyter, you could use any of the other methods that I described in the first video. It will work great. But I think for teaching people, I think Jupyter is great. And so to do that, I have an environment called PyTutorial. And so to activate the environment, I just have to do anywhere on my computer. So I'm using the terminator. Open your terminal and do conda activate. The name of the environment, mine is PyTutorial. And if I hit enter, then now it moves from base into this particular environment. And now if I type a Jupyter -lab, then it will launch the Jupyter notebook for me. I've already have it running in one of my browser, but let me just run it so that you see what it does. So it will open my browser, it will open Jupyter notebook in my browser, and I already have it here in my PyCourse, and it's open here as the second one. So I will close this one so I don't have duplicate. Okay, and so if I come back here, it's the same stuff. And if you click on this plus sign, you could be able to create a script. In this case, I want to use the notebooks. You could also create a normal Python script by just clicking on this one, or even a markdown, or even access a terminal. But let's click on this one, Python 3 kernel, and this will create a new one here. Shows now. Let's rename this one and call it variables. So today I'll be teaching variables. That's why I give variables, and I will do a 2 pound and give it Python variables. And I will click on this code and change it to a markdown. So now it's like a text to render it nicely. So now I have a header that says Python variables. And in this particular video, I intend to cover the following. I want to do variable declaration. So I'll show you how to declare variables, data types, and so how you could be able to check what is the type of the variable that you just created, whether it's an integer, a float, a string, a list, tuple, dictionary, set, Boolean, or so on and so forth. And also I'll show you how to do the conversion of type, so to move from, say, float into integer, or one maybe string into a float, maybe an integer into a string, and so on and so forth. And then I will show you how to properly, or like the best practices of like naming variables in Python, but also I also introduce you to constants. So with that said, let's get going. Great, so let's start by doing variable assignment. And so to assign, so let me just write down assign variables. And so with a pound, if you just do a pound in front of your whatever you're coding, it makes it a comment. So if I run this, nothing will happen because it's just a comment. This is just to help someone that is like looking through this code to know exactly what I'm doing down here. And so if I say x is equal to 10, if I run that, nothing showed up, but now in memory I have x, and I could check that by doing whos. If I do whos, then it tells me that x is in the memory already, and this x, it tells me the type is an integer, and the data information is a 10, which is the very attached to this guy. And so basically, if I type X now, I should print and I should see the value of 10 shown on the screen. Great. Let's add more. I could even go back up here and say y is equal to 3.142. Yes, that's the value of pi. But now this one is just a whole number, and so this is an integer. That's why we saw this integer here. So this is actually an integer. Okay, this one has a point, so it's a fraction. It's no longer a whole number, and so this is what we call a float, right? So this is a floating number because of this decimal, and these numbers are following it. So it's not a whole number. It's not just a 3. And so if I run this now and I do whos again, then I have two numbers, and this is telling me that this is a float and this one is an integer. Looking good so far. Let's create another one. Say name. So I'll ask you, what is your name? And say my name is Bernard. And see, I use two quotation. I could use a single quote or a double one and put this. This tells Python that what you're providing here is a string. And so if I run that now and I do whos, then it tells me that yes, there's another variable named name, and it's a string, and the information contained it is my name, which is Bernard. Looking good. So this is actually what is called a string, and that is the str for short. str for short. Looking good. And so the next is to, let's create something like a Boolean. Let's say is active is equal to true. Okay, and this is actually a Boolean. So if I do whos now, then it tells me that the type is actually what? A Boolean. So this is a Boolean. That's been a bool, but that's a Boolean. This is how you use Boolean if you want to do it in full. And so that's that. These are the basic ones that you should know at the start, at least these types, and this is how you assign. And so if I like request for this, it should give me this information because the variable is carrying this information in it. If I request for this, if I request for name, you could already guess what will I see? Bernard. Great, and it's a string. And if I request for this one, I will see the true. Just like if I request for y, I will get this particular number. I could also use these particular variables to create another one. So for example, I could say c is equals to y times 2, for example. Now I have a c. If I print a c, then the answer is this, because I say y times 2. I could say y raised to power 2. That's raised to power. I have 2 asterisk is raised to power. And then that will give me the value. Another way of checking type is just to do a type. If I do a type and pass in that variable, then I want to check the type of it, then it tells me that the type of this particular c that I just created now is a float. The hint is just know that once you have a float and then you multiply it with an integer, your resulting value will still be a float. Great. So we have added another variable called c, such that if we do whos now, we will see a c now, and that is the value of the c. And there are ways to increase or decrease the precision of this number. And so for example, if I want to make this a 2 decimal number, then what I have to do is basically I could do c is equal, or let's just do it here. Let's just say round that particular expression to 2 decimal places, and then if I check my c just has 2 decimal places. If I tell it to a 1 decimal place, then I should just have what, a 1 decimal place, and it rounds to 1 decimal place. If I leave it to 4, I will have it in 4 decimal places. So that's how you do trunking, or approximation, or taking to the nearest whatever. Okay, And so that's how you assign variables information, or that's how you assign variables basically. We could try to use the print statement to access this information. And so I have this that says print x comma y name and that. So if you run this, then it tells me x, this is the x, y, this is the y, name, this is the name, and true is true. So we're able to print all this information rather than just putting it here and running that. And so if you're using like the native Python script, then it's using print is very handy. But with Jupyter, I could easily get access to these variables easily without doing the print. But so just so you know. Okay, there's also another way of like assigning multiple variables to values to, or assigning multiple, or doing multiple assignments at once. And so here's an example. And so this one is multiple assignments. I have A, B, C. You could use any number. You could use X, Y, Z, whatever. X, Y, Z, or whatever alphabet you want to give it. And you just have to change this to Y and Z. And so we're giving the first to the first, the second to the second, and the third to the third. And now we're printing it. So if we run this, we'll see that value. So instead of having it this way that we're just doing this is equal to this and go to a new line, this is equal to this, we could also like use a comma in between and use the same length or amount of information on the other way, and it's able to like pass the information into the corresponding variables as it should. So that's also a possibility. I just wanted to mention there. There's also what is called dynamic typing, where you could, for example, initially give a certain information into a variable and then you swap it or you update it with another information. What happens? And so here's a code to explain that. And so here you have like a variable change both in values and in type. And so in this case I gave a variable value 100 and I call it variable, which is the initial one, and it's an integer. And if I print this at this stage, it will tell me that this has a value of 100 and type is integer. I later overrode this information with a string that says I am a string, and if I print it, then it should change to a string. So the first one was an integer, the second one now is a string. So there's also a condition or a situation of having like dynamic typing. So just be careful so that you don't like overwrite information over the other ones. Okay. And then next I would touch base on the basic structures, covering things like dictionaries. And so you have a list. A list is started with a square bracket. So if you have a square bracket and then you put in numbers or put in whatever you want, elements, usually call them, and you separate them with a comma, then you could pass those information into something. In this case it's still a variable, but now this is a list. The type is a list, and this is actually mutable because you can slice and do changes to it as you want. If we use normal parentheses, then what you have is a tuple. So remember, square we give you a list, normal parentheses we give you a tuple, and this is actually immutable. So you can hardly make changes to it. You wouldn't be able to make changes to this basically. And if you use some query bracket, then this is in form of a set. Okay, so if you just do the same thing, passing this information again, this will also be in this variable. This is a variable and this is also a variable. Okay, that's why I'm having it in this particular section of the video or tutorial. But also you could also create a dictionary, and dictionary will have like a key and it will have a value usually and a command, and then this is the value, and this is the key. This is the age of Bob, and the name is a key. And so that's how a dictionary usually a curly bracket. You do have a column separating the key from the value, and it has comma to separate different information in between the dictionary. Okay, so here I've shown you how to create lists, how to create tuples. Just take note of all these type of brackets used, how to create sets, and how to create dictionaries. So if you run this, we also have new variables there. So if we do whos, that will print a lot of stuff. So this is like, it tells, oh, this is a dictionary, this is a list, this is a set, this is a tuple, and it has n equals to 3. Those are 3 values. Again, Python counts from 0, so you're seeing 4 things here, but it's actually 3. The length is 3. Okay, let me know if there's any question. Just drop it in a comment. And the video is getting a bit long. Let me try to end it now. And so last I will cover the constants. You could also declare constants or access constants in Python too. So for example, a constant by convention, generally in Python you do them in capital letters. And so if it's a pi, you don't just type small pi, you just say pi capital. And so anyone that is reading your code, once you see capital letters, you know that, oh, this is a constant value. So it's just a single constant value that's constant. And so for example, the max limit of your maybe your color bar or whatever, or your values that you're plotting, that's what you want to constrain it to, then that's a constant. And so if we run that, and if we do whos again, we'll be able to see that has been added, and that's actually also a variable, and that's the max. So if I'm browsing through these, I'll know that these are variables, they are changing, but these are actually constant, but they have values. Okay, other best practices, use meaningful names. And so if you want to say something about number of cups, then say some, you could type something like num cups equals to maybe 4, and then you could go on to code. So try to make use of reasonable names for your variables. So don't just give something that's abstract that wouldn't make sense to you in the next 3 years, or even someone else that is trying to read your code. So it's crucial for you to think through before assigning or sort of defining your variables, so that it's thoughtful and it makes reading of the code easy. Usually there is what is called PEP 8 naming convention. Try to look through that and follow those guidelines, and also avoid overwriting input names. And so there are other stuff already input in Python. For example, time it's already in Python, but I'm surprised that it did not highlight there. But if I try to assign something to time, I mean, I'm surprised it worked here, but it's because I did not import time. But there are other stuff like lambda. So if you're working with wavelength and you have something like lambda, anyone that have the green, it means it's already. So if I try to assign something here, it will give me an error because it's an invalid things, because this is already available in memory. So you try not to use variables that are already used by Python. So if, for example, if I want to use if as my variable name, then it wouldn't work because if is already in Python. Or if I want to use for, anyone that shows green means it's already a variable, so try not to use those. Great. With that, I will end it here. I hope this was useful on creating variable. I think I've covered everything. I'll see you in my next video, where I will be teaching you about data types. Then please subscribe if you found this useful, and share it to others.